Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, hello there, Morgan. Good to see you.
Well, it's good to be seen here at the start of my show.
And Pat George is back from a whirlwind trip. And boy, did he have a good trip this weekend.
I went to San Antonio, Texas. You know how hot it is? 106 with a feels-like temperature of 116.
Holy moly.
Are you serious?
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm serious, yes.
Is it as humid there as it is here? It must be if it's got that 10
No, it was
degrees.
dry. It took all of the... It took all
it's
of it
that
out
dry
of
heat.
Oh, it was bad.
You know what people always say? It makes me laugh. And they're like, well, you know, the dry heat isn't as powerful. And I say to myself, when you feel like you have a laser beam pointing into your body and frying you, that's pretty darn powerful.
That's right.
We rode the boats. If you're familiar with San Antonio, they got a little river walk, and you ride these boats, and you hoped for the overpasses. That lasted about 5 seconds because you got out of that sun for just a minute, and it was still hot under there, but it was at least not the beating sun. It was the closest I've been to heat exhaustion in a long, long time.
Wow. Imagine the guys training in that. I mean...
Yes.
With the pants tucked into the boots, I saw it.
And it's happened.
Yeah.
To somebody I know very well.
Well, sure. I remember guys falling out under having heat stroke out there in Oklahoma. So tell us a little bit, give us a flavor for what the graduation was like, because your son Austin is now officially a TAC-P.
Yes, he is a tactical air control party specialist.
And when you tell people who are in the know that someone is a TAC-P,
yeah.
they're like, oh, one of those.
That's serious.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Well, those are the guys they drop in way behind enemy lines. I mean, they're basically within, a few hundred meters of a target of these major bombs, because those are the guys that have to sit there and point the laser beam at the target.
Plus air support.
Yeah, so that the planes which drop the bombs, which follow that laser beam that's being pointed by the person on the ground.
Right, and what I found out, that the laser beam now, in TAC-Ps back in the day, they would put a laser beam on the side of a mountain and you just hit the mountain. Now it's so advanced that you take that laser beam and shine it in a cave, and the missile will come down, follow it, and go into the cave.
Wow.
Go right down in the cave.
It's amazing. How do they, you just wonder how they get them to how do you maneuver a missile like that? I mean, I don't really know that much about, ballistic missile maneuverability technology, but obviously by pointing that, back nozzle some different ways, they could really create a lot of...
And there's another thing, the guns on the Jeeps they ride in, if they get fired upon, it automatically turns itself to where the fire came from and just starts shooting.
And returns fire.
It returns fire. So if you shoot at any of these armored vehicles within approximately 3 seconds, you get fire back.
Wow.
So
and you may or may not know this, but I'm sure they gave Austin some really good accessories. Is that a good word?
Well, he said, Dad, they measured my head 6 different ways for the helmet. For his Terminator outfit. It's like $40,000 worth of uniform
crazy?
That he puts on his body. But he is now considered, and they did this in the graduation, he's considered a deadly weapon, and they told him to lay low and to watch out because he's a marked man.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of people in the bars want to pick a fight with somebody like that.
Not only that, they being a special operator and the information and what he has as far as in the knowledge, they don't ever even want him. There are people that are could be here. They don't want him to get to where he has to go, so they'll stop it here.
Right.
So
I didn't think about that.
So when I ride around or talk, people, and we tell him he works in a lunchroom.
Yeah.
Yep. And Austin, by the way, is not his real name.
Right, Austin's not his real name.
No, we just came up with that because
his real name is Megan.
Yes.
You guys. So how was the ceremony? I mean,
the ceremony was very nice. There were 26 guys that went in, 11 made it, so there were 11 families that were very proud, and they had a guest speaker of a lady whose husband was a TAC-P. And he was on patrol in Afghanistan, and a suicide bomber ran up to his vehicle and killed everybody in the vehicle.
Oh, man.
Oh, my gosh.
So she said, I'm not here to tell you that you're going to die, but I just want to tell you that, the family's here to support you. And, and they stick together. It really is a family unit.
That's what I was asking you about, because my one experience when I went out to Tinker Air Force Base and saw a ceremony there when it goes, what's it called? There's a special name for it when the general is leaving. They're going to another one. It's not coming to my mind right now. But family environment. Oh my gosh, they're just one big family unit. Everybody who's part of that.
It's funny that the generals in that, they don't last very long on air bases. They last 3 to 4 years.
They move around.
Yeah, they move around a lot. So a lot of that takes place. But it was very enjoyable. The neat thing about it at the end, they hand you your beret, and then the 11, one at a time, they march off up the walkway out of the room, and they're blousing their pants and putting their beret on. And by the time they have called the last one, they turn around and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we'd like to introduce 11, the United States Air Force, 11 new members of the TACP force." And they walk in, and you just get goosebumps. And they go back up on stage, and then they sing the Air Force song, "Off We Go into the Wild Beyond." And, they sang great.
That's great.
I said, wow, they're all on key.
Well, they're happy as heck. They just finished, 10, how long was the training?
Let me see. It started in March.
Okay.
and ended about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
And Pat, you should have been the announcer. Ladies and gentlemen, wouldn't that have floored Austin? Wait, I didn't recognize that voice.
It was funny. They showed everybody's personalities in a private video. They kind of a funny video.
Oh, that's cool.
And my son, he likes to talk on the phone because he has one special fiance that, he's going to marry this weekend. He's going to Montana to get married. So
lots of big changes for him.
Oh, yeah, I had the changes. As a matter of fact, his changes are that he went in at 17. He became a TACP last weekend. His next goal is staff sergeant. He's about, a month from that. He plans on having 3 kids in 5 years. He wants to be stationed in Germany, and he's going to retire in 20 to 30 years.
Wow. Got it all planned out.
Well, hey, so far, he's already done the impossible, so I can't see why he can't knock those other goals off his list.
Yeah, and he was, now they've been, getting beat up for about, this period of time. Right. Well, this morning I said, where are you? He goes, in the gym.
Wow.
So
never miss a day.
He
doesn't miss a beat. Didn't take any time off.
And he loves it, though. He really loves it. I'm very, very, very proud. But he just loves it. Ever since he was very young, he's always wanted to do it, and it's doing what he loves now. So.
Right. Well, I've been in his birthday party before where he, at 1 o'clock in the morning, he's doing calisthenics.
I got to tell you, it's very crazy to see this one picture. All of those guys that you saw at that birthday party, none of them made it. Wow. They all failed.
What?
Every one of those guys failed, but one guy in the picture. They lined up on the beach one day. Every one of the guys that Morgan is talking about that went, they were in that circle. None of them made it, but one person.
Wow. Well, that doesn't surprise me that Austin made it.
Me neither.
And that's it makes you just so proud when you think of that. There were all those families that had that hope, and they'll try again, and hopefully they will make it down the road. But when you know that your son's the one that made it in that picture, it's just overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and folks, if you want to hear from Austin George himself, you can go to our YouTube page at Morgan Street Media. And, back down in the list somewhere, what was it about? I don't know. Was it a year ago, maybe? Maybe not quite that long, no. But maybe 8 months ago. Sure. He happened to be in the studio, and we had some dialogue with him, and he kind of explained what he was going to be doing. And that is one of our more popular YouTube videos, actually. So a lot of people, I think, from your family and others have gone out there and viewed that one. But I will say it's relatively easy to be one of our most popular YouTube videos. So, folks, get out there and watch some of them. Because what are we? I'm getting ready to crack. We're getting close to cracking 10,000 total views. Which, that's a big deal.
Even despite this not being the right angle to take on the World Wide Web to get attention.
Right. I'm afraid, YouTube, if you look at it, they can auto-generate the closed captions for each of the videos. So I believe that the processor that they use, the algorithm, actually essentially knows everything that you've said. Once you upload the video, they know what it's all about, and they know the keywords. They can pick through the translation or the CC, closed captioning, and find the keywords. So, there's probably some keywords, and they've probably decided that, they're not going to push our videos out to just everybody. But we do get some views. So,
well, bringing us to our next subject matter, we're going to get into the whole Epstein situation. Yeah. And as this was all breaking, I was going through Twitter, looking at different people on Twitter, and someone that seemed to have a lot of information about it said, "Oh, let me follow that person. That's kind of interesting." And I followed them, and I didn't think much about it. But then I looked back a few minutes later and noticed they were extremely conservative viewpoints. So, and they had a big following. And I said, "Okay, watch this." Sure enough, within 8 hours, I had 5 less followers.
Yeah.
Now, you can't tell me that I don't lose 5 followers.
That's right. You're a popular person.
I'm not even that. That's
but
just unusual to just drop 5 followers.
Right.
It's almost like Twitter punishes you for following other conservative people.
Well, they build that into the algorithm, I think, to train you. I mean, it's little things that you'll notice, and it's trying to train you behaviorally.
Yes.
Like, you better not talk like this. You better not like people who talk like this. Or you better not think like this, or else you're going to find yourself a social outcast. Now, the truth of the matter is that offline, none of that's true because, there are all kinds of people who are conservative and who go to these Trump rallies. I mean, we saw that just last week in New Hampshire. There are huge crowds. So there are all kinds of people who think like this, but the social media control structure that they've built tries to make you think that you're the outlier, that you're the one who's behaving in a way that shouldn't be. We'll talk about this some more when we come back.
And we're back on the Morgan Streetman Show. Congratulations again to Pat George's son. We're so proud of Austin, what he's done to become a TAC P. And now we're going to get into the kinds of worldly events that Austin is going to be, I don't know, protecting us from.
Well, if Epstein was still around, we could send Austin in to take care of him, right? I mean,
he wouldn't have fallen asleep.
That's right.
That's what I'm saying.
Thank you for that. He wouldn't have fallen asleep, but Epstein might have. He might have still wound up where he is. It's so funny because last week, we had E.B. Tucker on the show, and of course, I didn't get in until the end of the show, if you heard that, because a person hit me in their car, and so that delayed my getting to the studio because we had to wait for law enforcement to do a report and information exchange and things like that. But, there's so much on this Epstein story, and we just didn't really get to talk about a lot of the little details, and of course, more details have been coming out in the interim as well. And, folks may be getting a little bit of Epstein fatigue, so we won't do the whole show on him. But, there were a few things that I thought were very interesting about the situation that he was in. Because if you notice, he was killed on a Saturday morning, he committed suicide on a Saturday morning. And, if you notice, the day before, they released a whole bunch of documents. It was a trove of his documents from previous cases. And those documents named, some pretty high-level Democrats.
Highfalutin people.
Yeah, some pretty high-level folks. And it wasn't necessarily names that you had heard before, but it was people like New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson and others. And, of course, Epstein has that big property out in New Mexico where, I don't know if you've heard this, but it was sort of well known, and people talk about this. This is not sensationalism. This is true, that Epstein was always talking about his plan to, have you heard this? His plan to reseed the human race from his Mexico ranch. You're giving me a look. You didn't hear that, did you?
And I thought I combed through every Epstein article I could find. Maybe I got Epstein fatigue before that was released.
Oh, I know. It's a lot. But, this ranch that he has out in New Mexico on several thousand acres, there's some pretty cool video out there of this. I saw some guys who actually went out there and took video, and they trespassed on his ranch on Saturday morning. Now, they had already planned to go out there and do this kind of expose of the ranch before, he committed suicide. But they were on their way. They got the news, and they went ahead and went forward with it. And they basically parked, because you can't drive up to the ranch real easily. So they parked far away from the ranch and kind of snuck up to it. And then they had their video going, and they gave kind of a little tour of the ranch. And then at some point, they came upon the realization that somebody was inside. Probably the caretakers were inside. And then there was the sounds of some dogs barking. Now, I think those were like audio that they played through speakers. I don't think there were any real dogs released, but the guys just took off sprinting like back towards the property line or, wherever they came from, basically. But they had some interesting videos of that whole place. And in any event, that compound supposedly was where he was either keeping women or planned to keep women, or, maybe the women were there, willingly. I don't know. We don't know all the details. It sounds to us, or at least to me, like he was supposedly keeping women against their will, maybe in the Virgin Islands and who knows where else. Certainly a multi-thousand-acre New Mexico ranch way out in the middle of nowhere is not a place that's going to be under heavy law enforcement scrutiny. They basically can't even get out there to it. So in any event, it was apparently his plan to reseed the human race with his DNA, which, thank God he didn't get to follow through on that plan, because that's not what we need is a bunch of Jeffrey Epsteins running around.
Has this story dropped off the first or second page? We're not hearing a lot of it. All of a sudden, he did it. It's over.
Well, the coroner last week, took a number of days to make a ruling on the autopsy. And I thought it was kind of funny because I saw a Twitter post from somebody I know, and they said, he found this was a suicide because he did not also want to suffer from an unexpected suicide. The coroner took a few days to do it because, there were all these broken bones in the front part of Epstein's neck.
And what do they call one of those bones that was broken?
The hyoid bone?
The hyoid bone. That's very, there's like a 1% chance that would break if you committed suicide per the way that he described.
Right.
We've purported to.
Right. We've seen experts. I've seen experts kind of give, as low as 1%, and people saying, look, I've done 20,000 autopsies. And I've maybe seen a suicide result in a breaking of a hyoid bone once, and then other people have said, maybe it's as high as 7 to 10%, but it's a low number. And that's because of the direction of the force. And you have to think about this if you were strangling somebody, particularly, I guess you would do that from behind and not with your hands. I mean, if he was strangled, I suspect the bed sheet was wrapped around his neck and pulled tight. And that produces a force going back towards your throat, kind of, from the front to the back. Whereas if you're hanging yourself, the force is really more of an upward direction force against the bottom of your chin and your head. And, of course, the way you typically die from hanging is not strangulation, right? It's the breaking of the neck. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why they have these. That's why when you see the real hangings as executions, they're on these tall platforms. And that huge knot that's on the side of the hangman's noose is put on the side of their head. And that knot actually has a purpose. It's because that knot is what pushes the head to the side and snaps the neck as they drop that lengthy distance. So a hanging should be a quick death. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be a strangulation. And in fact, they say it's really failed when it turns into a strangulation. But when you look at what happened to Epstein, I mean, the initial story came out, and I sent out a tweet. I'm like, how does a guy on suicide watch commit suicide, right? And then they come and they tell us, oh, well, he wasn't on suicide watch after all. I don't know if you heard that.
I heard the bed sheets were not strong enough to do it also.
Well, on suicide watch, they're not. And I would imagine that it's questionable even on regular because they can make those sheets pretty thin. Mm-hmm. And there's no place to hang yourself from in one of those rooms. There's nothing to tie onto. They build those rooms specifically to avoid places for people to tie onto where they could hang themselves. So they're designed not to allow this to happen. But it's so amazing to me that he allegedly tried to commit suicide, 3 weeks before he was actually killed. And we had that story. And apparently he told his lawyers, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but apparently he told his lawyers that it was that cellmate that he had, who, if you remember, was a former police officer, I think an NYPD police officer, who had gotten into a drug gang and had gone up to upstate New York. And
if you saw pictures of this guy, he was a Hulk. He was a real live Hulk.
I think his name was Nicholas Tartaglione, and I'm assuming I'm saying that close to right.
I got scared just looking at his photo.
Yeah, he's one of these kind of dudes that you do not want to mess with. He'll rip your head right off. And apparently
that was his cellmate.
Yeah, and just randomly this, obviously he has some conscientiousness, some orderliness to want to become a cop, but then he's also got this dark side that he becomes a criminal. So, I'm sure he's the kind of guy who would just take Epstein out just because Epstein was such a bad guy, right? But, the question is, was he involved in the actual murder of Epstein or suiciding of Epstein, if that's what happened? And, of course, we weren't there. It's certainly within the realm of possibility that Epstein tried to kill himself. It just is awfully suspicious that the day after this trove of documents came out naming a bunch of high-level Democrats, that he winds up suicided, and he was apparently trying to cooperate. He was telling the authorities, hey, I'll give you names. I'll give you names and details if you'll cut me a little bit of a deal. If you'll make it to where maybe I can one day get out of prison or something like that. We heard things bandied around about he was trying to get as low as 5 years. And, when you look at that kind of sentence, and particularly the sentence he got down here in the state of Florida, in context of other sentences that you've seen, it's very apparent he got a super sweetheart deal. And even just a 5-year deal now would have been a sweetheart deal as well. But his little sentence down here where he got a year of, house arrest, putting quotes around that kind of thing, because he was basically allowed to go during the day, to his work, allegedly, and they didn't keep track of him or what he was doing during the day. He was, on the honor system, which a guy like that, you could trust me. I'll only do what I say I'm going to do, right? And so, anyway, it's just a sweetheart deal. I mean, I saw somebody who was, I think it was the guy, in fact, that we're going to talk about in Philadelphia, and he had some gun charges where he got caught with a couple of pistolas that he wasn't allowed to have. And he did 4.5 years in federal prison for that. 4.5 years in prison.
Wow.
Epstein abuses 60 young girls, allegedly, but I mean, there's a lot of evidence behind this. Abuses 60 young girls, and he gets a 1-year sentence, with the ability to travel around all day long and do whatever he wants, essentially. It just doesn't ring true. It doesn't seem fair. Obviously, he got a sweetheart deal. Now,
so quickly, too, this all happened.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Well, didn't it strike you guys? I mean, it certainly struck me this was predicted. We saw this one coming from miles away. Everybody was talking about Epstein's going to get taken out. He's going to get suicided in prison. And then, bam.
And then it happens.
It happens.
So if you know that's going to happen, you do what you need to prevent it.
Right. And now we got all these stories about how the cameras were malfunctioning, the guards fell asleep, they were being overworked. I mean, it's just one.
It's like a caper. Doesn't it sound like a goofy cartoon or something?
It does. It does. It's just one thing after another. I mean, nobody's committed suicide in that facility in 40 years. He's the first one in 40 years. Doesn't that tell you what you need to know about how unsafe or safe that facility is? We'll be right back.
As we're talking during the break off air, Morgan Streetman is reminding me that I can't get lulled into the news cycle that everybody else gets, where you read the story when it's hot and then you don't read the follow-up articles.
Yeah.
That's what's happened with this Epstein stuff, because I've read about half of it and then more trickles out.
Well, all these little facts are so interesting. I mean, here's a fact that we talked about, right as soon as we went to break, that we wanted to tell you. And then we've got another fact we've got to tell you. But this first fact that we have heard now, I wonder myself exactly how these reports got out, but there's a bunch of news media that is reporting that on the morning of Epstein's suicide, screams and other sounds were heard coming from his cell. So I don't know if you heard that, Pat George. Yeah, that there was screaming coming from his cell.
Wow. No, not at all.
Now, again, I'm not exactly sure how those news reports would have been gotten, but you would imagine if there was screaming that it would have been heard in some of the surrounding cells. I mean, these things are not, soundproof or anything. Now, they are concrete, but, so probably a couple or 3-4 cells around him would have heard it if he was screaming what we like to say, bloody murder. But now here's the last fact that we'll tell you for right now about Epstein, and we do have a few other things we want to get to. But this last fact that we wanted to share with you is, if you remember his girlfriend / madam / was she was almost like a pimp.
Maxine.
And that's... Yeah, Maxwell. That's Ghislaine Maxwell. And I'm learning, I don't think the S is now pronounced. I've seen it's either Ghislaine or Ghislaine, and I'm going with Ghislaine. But anyway, that's her name, Ghislaine Maxwell. She was spotted allegedly at an In-N-Out Burger in California reading a book about the lives and deaths of CIA officers.
And I saw that photo.
You saw that photo. Mm-hmm. Now, what's weird about that photo is there's she was obviously at the In-N-Out Burger. I mean, the photo's staged. We'll just put it that way, because she was obviously at the In-N-Out Burger for a long period of time, because all of the people that are eating around her, if you look at the various different photos that are taken, there's changes. Those people change. And so she's obviously sitting there through a couple of meals, and she's reading this book about the lives and deaths of CIA officers. And, you're telling me, she hasn't been seen in public in 3 years, allegedly, and you're telling me she just happens to be right in the middle of that book when she shows up there? No. I personally think that's a message. I don't know what message it is exactly, but I think that's some kind of a message. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. And this I got onto over the weekend. Where it gets even weirder is that apparently those photographs were photoshopped, is what they're saying, because and you're just going, what the heck? Because it's apparently they may have been taken up to a month ago. It's unclear exactly when they were taken, but they don't appear to necessarily have been current as of last week, which is the way it was portrayed in the news. And there are billboards in the background of those photographs that, according to what I'm reading, may have been photoshopped, which is just mind-blowing. So they actually changed some of the billboards to reflect different advertisements, and it's been, reporters apparently have gone out to that In-N-Out Burger and looked around and seen, wait a minute, that's not the same billboard from the photo just last week. And so they've contacted the advertising companies and said, hey, did you have this kind of ad on that billboard? And they said, no, we have no record of that. And so what in the heck fire is going on? I mean, it's just a strange confluence of events and facts that continue to develop around this story.
What about the stories of letters being posted at different places, and if anything happened to me,
sure,
those would come out?
The dead man switches, right? And that's we talked some about that in our very truncated Out There segment last week, which is that, you think about it, okay, well, they had Epstein killed. Well, I mean, if Epstein really was this high-level blackmail guy, I mean, if he was smart, he would have put some of that information with people around the world and said, look, if anything ever happens to me, you mail this to the New York Times or some other press outlet. Make sure this gets out in the public knowledge. And then you tell the people that you're blackmailing, look, you don't have the option to just kill me. I know you're really angry with me and everything else, but the best thing you could do right now is just pay me, because if you kill me, then all you're going to do is be sure that this stuff is going to come out, because I have secret agents all around the world who are prepared to release this, if anything happens to me. And so that would be a reason, because we talked, like I said, in the Out There, that, the body that was kind of shown as being Epstein's body, there were some issues with, there were parts of it that, don't match up exactly with maybe the way that Epstein looked, that being the ear and the nose and the brow line, but could it be that they went in and yanked him out of there, substituted a dead body of somebody who looked very much like him, because that might have kept him from activating his dead man switches. So that's kind of one of those threads that, it's pure speculation, right, based on what we can reason through. But, it's an interesting thought. We'll just put it that way. I, of course, don't know what happened here. I mean, there's certainly within the realm of possibility that, he was suicided. That's what we all expected, and that's what seems to make some of the most sense. And it's also within the realm of possibility that he did kill himself, although I think that's kind of the least likely scenario that we've talked about. We've heard that he was very excited about his defense. He just paid his lawyers a bunch of money to file some motions that, in his mind he was going to win. He told his lawyers on Friday, hey, see you guys Sunday. And then very, very early Saturday morning, he allegedly commits suicide. So,
did you also hear he does have some writings that they're going to look into, like he had diaries, I believe, in his St. Thomas house?
Well, we don't know what they found, because the FBI last week raided his island, Pedo Island. And, of course, I'm shaking my head, and I'm like, guys, what took you so long? I mean, he was arrested, 40-something days ago, right? Why wouldn't you be down there the day he was arrested and raid that place? I mean, there are photos that you can find that computers were removed from that island, because you could see the before photos where the computers are there, and then the after photos when the FBI shows up and the computers are gone. So somebody already removed a bunch of computers from the island. If you remember, about a week after he got arrested, there was a big fire on the island. You remember that? I mean, there's a big fire. Now, what was burned up in that fire? Who knows? How about this? But now we're going to end up spending the whole show on this. How about this? A few months before that story came out in the Miami Herald, which was like last November, which is kind of what, reignited the public interest in the Epstein matter. But about 2 months before that, he paid for a giant concrete mixing truck to be taken down to his island. Now, that is not a cheap prospect, right? To put a big – now, what in the world's he using that concrete mixing truck for? And by the way, he paid extra to get it there super fast, which means he felt there was some time pressure. Now, what's he do? Is he sealing up tunnels? Is he burying things in concrete? Who knows? Is he putting concrete? I mean, we could speculate about all kinds of things. They talk about bones being found on the island and things like that. I mean, God forbid that's what was going on there. But, it does kind of seem like it had some of those elements to it. So why did he have to pay extra and took all the risk if this concrete mixer sunk, because they weren't willing to ship it to him where they keep the risk? You know how shipping works, where somebody has to take the risk of loss in transit, And there's all these terms for that. It's under what's called the Uniform Commercial Code, the UCC. So it's very confusing to anybody who doesn't do shipping and receiving or import-export, because all these little terms you have to know about, like FOB, freight on board, and things like that. You probably never even heard that. But these are terms that indicate who's got the liability if the item is lost in transit. And it could be either the seller can be responsible for getting it all the way to the buyer's front door, or the buyer can actually take responsibility, like from when it leaves the seller's warehouse, and many variations there in between. But in this particular instance, because he was needing to get it down there so quickly and he had to pay some extra, he actually had to take the risk of loss on that. So there's another fact that just tells you, something is not right about what was going on this island, which we already basically know. But, how many dimensions and how many facts do we not know?
One thing is guaranteed, though. Bigger stories in history have been covered up bigger than this. So we can guarantee that anything is possible.
And along the lines of cover-up, whenever you have someone who has all that money and who is plugged in with all of those powerful people, a lot is at stake. And that's what doesn't smell right about this. That's what doesn't make sense.
Right. Well, so many angles to that story. I mean, that's one that I think we're going to keep hearing about. It's funny. I saw some interviews with Donald Trump going back to 2015, and he was talking about Bill Clinton's problems with regard to Jeffrey Epstein and that pedo island that he went to. So, I mean, this story is known about among the power elite, and it's known what was going on with Epstein and, to a degree, who was involved with Epstein.
And it's sad that all these girls who were abused, their story is, they're probably just horrified by it. But that almost is under the radar because you have all this other stuff going on. Right. And they need to be recognized.
Right. Well, all kinds of places we go. You should see the picture of Prince Andrew going to church with the Queen, which is like a day after his good buddy.
Nothing to see here.
No, big smile. Ghislaine Maxwell wasn't crying at the In-N-Out burger. I mean, by the way, nobody's crying over the Bill Clinton and Hillary were seen and they're smiling, Saturday morning. I mean, nobody's crying over this guy. Nobody's like, man, he was a good man. I'm so sorry we don't have Jeff Epstein around anymore.
Nobody's come out and said, yeah, he was my buddy.
People just ran for the hills, didn't they? I mean, it tells you something when you live that kind of life. That really, even the people that you think are your friends, they're not even your friends.
Did they ever take and announce who took control of the body?
Well, no, they didn't. They said it was an Epstein associate, right?
That's all I ever heard.
That's all I ever heard. They've never said who took the body, right?
Who was the associate?
Because, whoever got the body might have recognized immediately, hey, this is not, it looks like Jeff, sort of, but it's not Jeff.
But I'm not going to ask any questions.
But I ain't saying anything because I don't want to also commit suicide,
Did he have any family?
Apparently not, that we know of. Apparently not.
He's just a party guy.
What a way to spend your life. And of course, you spend your life like that, and that's another thing. Why would you commit suicide? I mean, either if you're a religious person and you believe that there's some kind of accounting at the end of life for good deeds, bad deeds, whatever, and that's most religions have some form of that type of belief, then would you really be rushing off to that meeting with God after you lived a life like that? I think I'd be putting that off as long as possible, right? I wouldn't be committing suicide because prison's better than what you're going to run into when you got to go talk to God about what you've done. But if you're not a religious person, as I think every indication was that Jeffrey Epstein was not a religious person, and you believe that human beings are like a light switch, and when you die, you just flip the light switch off, and there's no hereafter, there's nothing to be dealt with about what's happened on this earth, and again, that's every indication is that's what Epstein believed, then why would you commit suicide? Because you're flipping your own light switch off. All you're ever going to get is the time that you got here, so why cut it short?
There's the music. What else are we going to talk about on the show today?
I wanted to talk something about this Philadelphia shooting because that really threw me for a loop last week. And I'll tell you, folks, if you watched any of that video, I mean, there is some video you got to, in my opinion, got to go out there and watch. And that is the other police officers kind of maneuvering in that community and, frankly, the way that they were treated. I mean, to me, it's appalling. It's absolutely appalling the way that these police officers were treated by the community. But there's obviously so much anger and so much strife between the police and the community. It's hard to imagine them living in peace. We'll tell you a little more about that when we come back.
And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. We're going to keep a good thing going and get back to some really crazy stuff that was found in Jeffrey Epstein's house. But before we do, as we were going to break, Morgan, you were filling us in on this situation in Philadelphia, which happened a week ago, and it happened overnight with the standoff.
Yeah.
And I remember coming to work in the morning and reading about it and going, oh my gosh, these officers, 6 of them were shot. I
know. It's unbelievable. Well, this guy, Maurice Hill, and I mean, this tells you a little bit about the gun control debate as well, folks, because, this guy had a lengthy criminal record. He'd been arrested at least a dozen times. He'd served time in federal prison. In fact, as I mentioned before, he'd served like 4.5 years in 2008 for firearms violations. So possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and he had a Smith & Wesson .357 and also a .45 caliber pistol, 2 pistols. So, this guy, this is where we talk about, gosh, we need some more gun control laws, and we need background checks, and we need red flag laws, and we need laws, more laws. And don't you get the fact that criminals don't obey laws? They break laws. And we got so many guns in this country, you're never going to be able to collect them all. I mean, that would be a lifetime-long process of trying to just collect them all. The criminals are never going to turn them in. They don't obey laws. So criminals are always going to have access to firearms. And do you want a guy like this, who's obviously got some serious mental issues? You want a guy like this getting a firearm in your community and then nobody else has a firearm? That's the key, because you're never going to stop a guy like this from getting a firearm. You could see that from his background. He should have been stopped at every point, and he wasn't. He was still able to get them. So now, do you want him to be the only one in the community that has them? Or do you want there to be some good guys, too, hopefully? Maybe some good guys like Schreiner, who've got a concealed carry, who can maybe step up to the plate and try and do something, or the Sarge or me or whoever who might have a concealed carry. I mean, to my way of thinking, you want as many good guys in the community to have firearms when something like this occurs so that they could try to do something about it. But he shot 6 police officers. But, again, what I want to point folks to, if they can locate the video, and I'll try and get out there on Twitter and retweet it, but if they can locate the video of the officers kind of like walking through the community and people screaming at him, people throwing full water bottles at him. I saw a lady shove a police officer, and it's obviously something this police officer was used to, because he didn't turn around and get up in her face, or he didn't do anything about it. He just kind of shrugged it off. And I thought, wow, what an embarrassment that community is. I mean, the way that they're treating their law enforcement officers. I mean, do they want law enforcement just to fence off the community and say we don't police in that community? Is that what people there want? I can't imagine the good. And, there's a lot of good law-abiding people that you don't see in the streets who live in these communities. They don't really have necessarily another option. And I can't believe that they don't want some kind of order, some kind of policing, some kind of safety in their own community. But all we see is the violent mobs who seem to be trying to throw the cops out. It
really is community specific across the country. In certain areas, it's like that. In certain areas, it's not. I could be naive about things, but I feel like for the most part in our Tampa Bay community, because I've done enough stories with different people of law enforcement about the programs they have going into certain communities and having sort of outreach, so there are good relationships with officers. Mm-hmm. And it does seem, you can go different places across the country and you'll have a different experience.
Right. Well, now let's flip back and talk about Epstein some more.
Starts at the top.
Yeah. Right. Well, I just, it flabbergasts me that anybody would not want to have some form of law enforcement available to their community, because then who's in charge? Mm-hmm. The criminals are in charge and they run the community. And is that really what you want? I mean, are they interested in doing justice? Are they interested in, not hurting innocent people? No, they don't care about any of that stuff. They only care about making money through crime. So, why would you want to live in a community like that? And I think if those communities end up throwing the police out, they're going to continue to pay these kind of prices for doing that. One other thing I'll mention to you about that guy, and this is not getting any airplay whatsoever, but he attended a very negative against, Western civilization, negative against America, sort of what they call a radicalized mosque in Philadelphia. So he was a Muslim, or is a Muslim, and you just wonder if that's part of where some of this hatred for the police comes from. I don't know, but it obviously is festering there in that community. So now let's go, and we only have a couple of minutes here, but let's talk about some of the interesting stuff that was found in Jeffrey Epstein's house. And, the most interesting thing, and Pat, you hadn't even heard about this, so I know this is still news to a lot of people.
I can't wait for you to get to it.
Oh, man, the most interesting thing that was found in his house, apparently right when you walk in, and this was seen by many people that had visited him, and people had taken photographs of this, so this is quote-unquote known about. All right, and this is a painting of what we might call a portrait, but we don't know if Bill actually sat for this one or not. I'm not sure. But it's a painting of Bill Clinton in Monica's blue dress in the Oval Office, sitting in a chair with his legs crossed, showing a little bit of skin. He's got on red high heels, and he's pointing at whoever the observer of the painting is, almost like, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Ms. Lewinsky. You remember when he did that, and he kind of pointing at you like he wasn't lying right to your face? Well, that's the picture that Epstein has, the painting, the portrait that he has right when you walk into his New York mansion. Now, you're telling me that guy isn't closer with Bill Clinton than we have all been led to believe? I mean, who has a painting like that in their house? I mean, somebody with a deranged mind, I would say. Somebody with a seriously deranged mind. Roxanne, you brought up something else he had, which was a chessboard.
He had a chessboard with his different staff members all scantily clad as the pieces. And he also had a big poodle that was stuffed.
A stuffed poodle?
Yes, and it wasn't well kept, whatever that tells you. He also had all these paintings of really creepy looking eyeballs as you walked through the home.
Strange.
Yes.
And those chess pieces were life-size.
Yeah, life-size mannequin-type chess pieces made to look exactly, I guess they were exact replicas of his staff member, assuming he's pretty close, and then scantily clad. And apparently that was right when you walk in at the bottom of the first staircase. It's like, can't miss it, center of the house. And, we hear from all these people like Ehud Barak, who was visiting him, and I had no idea what was going on there. And you just say, well, gosh, if you walked into a house of horrors like that, would you not get the idea that somebody was a little bit crazy? Here's one more video for those of you who are interested in Prince Andrew. There's a video out there of Prince Andrew at the front door as a young girl is kind of leaving. Now, she's not that young. Maybe she's in her 20s. I don't know. You can't tell exactly from the video. But he kind of waves goodbye to her, but he's trying to stand inside the house so nobody will see him. And then he gives a little furtive glance around the corner just to kind of see if anybody might have seen him opening the door at Jeffrey Epstein's. But again, here's a guy who's going to say, well, I had no idea. I'm shocked, I tell you, that this was going on in Epstein's house. Well, apparently there's a giant chessboard that says a little bit differently and a crazy painting of Bill Clinton. Hey, if you want to see that painting, go out to my Twitter page. Thanks for sticking with us, folks. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it.
Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.